Ernest, thank you very much for joining us today. It's really a treat to have you here at the University of South Carolina.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I had a terrific time with the students, and I'm really impressed with the facility and all of you, so I'm glad to be here. Really am.
So one of the things I heard you talking to the students about was how HR is in the very best seat to really drive business success. Can you say a little bit about what you mean by that?
We get a unique opportunity to see the business from a different vantage point. You know, we're engaged in all the meetings, and we get to see the leaders as they're representing the company from a strategic standpoint, how they relate with their people. And so we have a really unique vantage point. And I think with that comes the responsibility to help drive change if needed, to really help the organization move further along from a cultural standpoint or whatever it is you're trying to address. Because if we're going to help build a culture that drives strategic success for the organization, we've got to kind of stand in the gap at times and represent the organization from a different vantage point. Be the voice of the people in the organization who at times have something to say but don't necessarily have the courage to do it. And I think that's what gives human resources such a unique position. I mean, I really feel like I have a relationship or can build a relationship with a leader that's different and unique maybe than some others because of how I experience them in the organization.
So I want to, you touch on a couple of things that I want to come back to, but courage being one of them. But before that, can you say a little bit more about what it really means to be in that seat driving the business success and exactly why that is why you're in such a unique position to be able to do that?
You know, first of all, it's access to the leadership team that's important, number one. And number two, if you build the right relationships in the organization, they're coming to talk to you and get your perspective and vantage and your vantage point on certain topics or situations. I can't tell you the number of times that I leave a meeting and people say, how'd that go? How do you feel like this person received this? Do you think that the message got across? And then when you get 3 or 4 data points coming in at you like that, Anthony, then you can triangulate it and kind of go back and help move an agenda or initiative or strategy forward. Because you have now a holistic, comprehensive perspective that not everyone else gets. But it starts with having those relationships with people. And even sometimes I'll leave meetings, I'll call them and say, how do you think it went? You know, what message were you trying to get out there? Do you feel like that people received it? Because I always go back to this point that I made earlier. You know, there's the committed and uncommitted, and we want an organization where as we commit in the room, we're still committed when we leave the room. You know, not commit here just to kind of pass along and then come outside the room and we're saying something different. So I think I can be the glue at times to kind of help with those relationships and those different kind of scenarios that happen in meetings to bring everybody together and move the agenda forward.
And so is that related to, I heard you saying that you have to always look at it from the business first, that's the perspective, and then you think about how might you bring HR to facilitate that business success? Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I always start with how does the business win? And how do we transform the business to get to some desired state? And then on top of this, what are the human resource implications that exist that I can help then foster or move that particular thing forward? And I think it's incredibly important to understand the nature of the business. And that, you know, when I'm a fairly new CHRO, and that's how I start, is go out and learn the business and meet people and really understand what people do and how the business operates and how we make money and how investors think about it. But then go talk to the people and say, hey, what is it about this culture that excites you? What are you passionate about? What are some things that we can change? And then if you marry those two together, so if you now understand the business and you link your HR strategy to it, in my view, it's much more successful. And people understand it more because they can see the natural linkages that exist.
And so you've mentioned culture a few times. What does that mean that culture can be a strategy?
It's something I've just seen over the years, and I really believe that it's a strategic advantage. I believe culture is kind of your operating system in an organization. How you communicate, how you solve problems, how you work together. I think it's all culture that it kind of advances you in a positive way. And look, we've seen several stories of where culture's gone awry and what happens to organizations when that happens. And so you got to be value-centered. You got to have a culture of people respect one another and trust. And I'm a huge advocate of debate and dialogue. Huge advocate. But I always think you can do it in a respectful way. And you don't have to, you never have to jump out of that realm to be successful. And so when you think about why organizations succeed, it has cultural elements, and winning in the workplace is how you win in the marketplace. I mean, I fundamentally believe that.
So is it one of the cultures that you're striving for, to have that debate and dialogue kind of environment, which I presume what you're saying is being able to share your opinion and still respecting the person you're talking to?
Absolutely. And it's all leadership driven, quite frankly. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, I've seen it. You're in a room and you can see in a person's face that they have an opinion or a thought, but they won't give their thoughts words. And oftentimes it's because of the dynamics in the room. And so how do you free people up and foster that conversation and that dialogue so people feel comfortable about it? They have the courage and they feel the psychological safety around that, so that they then bring that dialogue up, because I fundamentally believe that the best results happen when everybody's contributing to the dialogue.
So that's a really interesting way to think of, you didn't even use the word, but inclusion,
Right.
Basically. So it's creating a culture of inclusion by fostering this ability to disagree. Am I hearing that part right?
Yeah, I mean, and I always have to put the caveat on it: disagree and having the dialogue respectfully. I've seen the best solutions happen at the end of vigorous debate, and it's because when you put an idea out there that I can think about and I can add to it maybe, or I can ask questions about it, all the great ideas surface. And then when we have all the great ideas and the information out there, I think that's when we can make the best decision. Rather than, and it can happen this way, you're in a room, the leader puts their point of view out, and the discussion ends. Well, how do we ever know if we have the best solution? We just have a solution. And I think that's where the cultural dynamics and inclusion come to play. Because an inclusive environment where there's trust and empowerment and collaboration and transparency, I think yields tremendous ideas and great business results.
And you said this has to start with leadership. So is that actually part of your role as CHRO? Do you see yourself as you have to help make sure leadership is modeling that behavior?
Absolutely, because who else can do it and feel safe, right? I mean, that we love to say that, as an HR professional coach your client, we teach people how to do it. But the reality is you spend so much time with a person. Sometimes it's hard to separate yourself out and say and question that person and coach them along the way. And what I like to teach my team is that you are actually doing an act of kindness by coaching that person. And I said, and it's easy to do. Just have a question dialogue with them. Say, here's what I heard. Here's what it meant. Is that what you intended? You can start that simple. Just ask questions. And so I do that a lot. I don't go in and say, you should have done this. And then I said, no. I said, we're in this meeting. You said this. How do you think that went?
And so that's sounding like even at the very senior level, at the executive leadership team, that's a part of the role that you take on for yourself, which implies that really is a team, not just a collection of high-performing individuals.
Absolutely. And we're trying to get the team to do that more. And part of what we've actually done with some of our leaders is we've done kind of formal, what I call assessment processes, where we're getting insight from others. And it's been amazing. We've got this concept called Leader Excellence. We call it Leader X. And we just did a podcast and I moderated with two of our senior leaders, and we asked them the question about that. What I loved about it, Anthony, was they were genuine and honest around some of the developmental feedback that they have, even as it pertains to relationships they need to strengthen or build. And I said, the power of that is when a new leader hears that and says, oh, if he can say that, and if he's struggling with that, and I'm struggling with it, now I'm open to working on it. Because I don't see it as a fatal flaw. I see it as an opportunity to grow.
So would you say that's one of the characteristics of a really great executive leadership team, this honesty and apparently this willingness to show vulnerability?
I love that word. I really do. I mean, and it's, people think it's weakness. I think it's the strongest act of courage you can have, because when you bring down the wall a bit and kind of allow people in and you're comfortable not knowing and bringing others' ideas to the forefront, I think that's one of the greatest leadership traits you can have. And anyone, we'd want to be on a team that fosters great dialogue and conversation and the safety and trust that goes along with being honest about something if you don't agree with it.
One of the topics that we really don't think very much about, or at least don't hear much about from an HR perspective, are joint ventures. And I heard you talking to the students today about what an amazing challenge and opportunity that can be. And it seems to be even more important in today's business environment than it has been. Can you say a little bit about HR's role in joint ventures and why it's so challenging, and maybe why it's so important these days?
Well, I'll start with why it's so important. I mean, it's, when you have sometimes competitive situations or huge investments to make in order to either enter a new market or grow in a market, sometimes it's easier and it makes more sense from a cost standpoint and investment standpoint to partner with someone. And I was surprised at how many joint ventures exist that we have just entered into, we're thinking about entering into, and that we're already in. But what's so interesting about that, I mean, when you're in the acquire mode, I'm not saying you should do this, but when you're in acquire mode, it's very clear where kind of ownership lies. When you're in a joint venture, and many of them are 50-50, when it's 51-49 or some other percentage, it's a little bit easier. But, we talk about culture earlier, and just getting your own culture to a place that is kind of where you want it and fosters creativity and innovation and those kinds of things. When you bring two different cultures together, and now we have to agree on how we go to market, who the customer base, how much we invest in technology, who's the leader, who's this role, all those kinds of things, it gets even more complicated. Because we're kind of answering to the JV, but we're answering to our parents as well. And I would say some of the greatest learning happens if you have to sit in one of those joint ventures. And I've had that experience, and so I know. And it was actually a joint venture with a competitor, but for a like product that we both wanted to be in, but couldn't afford the investment together. And it was some of the hardest but most rewarding work that I'd ever done.
So you say that was a really great experience for you, and so kind of on that topic, you were giving the students some really good suggestions for how to be continuous learners and the type of challenges they ought to take, especially early in their career. About, you said, be mobile, highly mobile, that sort of thing. Can you say a little bit more about kind of what are those key ways to get the critical skills you think that will make them most successful?
Yeah, I live on the premise, especially where these students are today, Anthony, that skill acquisition is important early in your career. And as much as you can be mobile, run to those particular areas that people are talking about, because generally what they're talking about are some of the challenges they're facing, and get challenging roles, be mobile early in your career, and ask to do things. Sometimes it's just, I think I mentioned in the class earlier, you see something that's interesting, it's important to the company, just go ask, is there a role you can play? I mean, that happened to me, and it's amazing at times what they end up creating or what they find for you to go do. But it's really important early to worry more about the skills you're acquiring than anything else.
So the skills early on, if you collect enough of them that are meaningful, because these are where the business is competing,
right,
that will overcome titles. The market will eventually see it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because I've seen situations myself where people were running to kind of levels or something in an organization. And at some point, you get exposed because you've missed the skill development required to move past that point. And I would love to tell you that I was thoughtfully planned. I just think it was lucky for me that I kind of had experiences and people guiding me where I was just taking these roles that were building greater capabilities and skills for myself that allowed me to get to a next level. And I think it's important for people to understand. I took a role. I remember I was asked to take a role that could have been on the staff of the CHRO of that business. But he told me, he said, you know what, you can take this role if you want. Money's no object, it'll be the same. Or you can go down in the organization and take this labor role that reports to someone, that reports to someone, that reports to me. That decision allowed me to kind of get my first senior executive role. That one decision.
So by going backwards, that's what propelled you forward eventually.
And I think we miss that nuance sometimes, but it was a skill I didn't have. But it was a critical skill. Someone who had done similar things but hadn't done that, they couldn't have moved into that role because that skill was so valuable in that particular senior role.
This gets us back to something you said at the very beginning about courage. So you clearly had the courage to be willing to go take those steps back with the confidence that it would pay off eventually. Can you say more about how important courage is for an HR leader and maybe some other ideas of where it comes up?
Yeah, it's a word that I speak to quite a bit, and here's why. For me, I grew up in a situation where, we didn't have a whole lot. I mean, it was comfortable, and I was single parent household and those kinds of things. And I found my mother to be the most courageous person I'd ever seen. And that courage, I think, lives in me. And I start from this premise. I'm going to always do what's right. I'm going to do kind of what a good person would do. But sometimes that means, again, standing in the gap of something that is not easy. That sometimes means telling someone something they don't want to hear but need to hear. That sometimes means taking an action that in the short term can be quite risky for you, but in the long term is a greater benefit for the organization or the person. And I just feel like it's my responsibility to be that person, to model it for others. And in the end, the way I feel about it is if that courage, if I know it's right and I do it, and there becomes some harm to me, then that's the harm that was worth taking for the benefit that I think it brings in the future.
And I'm presuming that some of what you're talking about there is that even though we talk about human resources, and especially at business school, we focus on the resources part of that a lot. You were reminding us that to always remember that there's a human
Absolutely.
in that HR.
I mean, there's human and human resources, and there's so much rhetoric at times around being a business partner and being a business player and being close to the business. I think all that's important. But do you know how many people come in to an organization every single day that just want to be, represented or heard or feel like they matter, they're valued? And I think that's a role that we can play. We can stop a leader and say, hey, time out. Take a moment just to say thank you. Take a moment just to tell someone they matter. And the net effect in the organization is exponential. Exponential in terms of what people will give you moving forward in an organization where that's happening.
So you said, you just described feeling valued, and one of the lines I overheard you say before that I'm going to take as my own and pretend and not give you any credit for it in the future is I will. It's already done. Is I heard you say, if you help employees find a reason or find their voice in understanding that they're creating value, they'll be less in need of capturing their own just for themselves.
Right.
So can you just say a little bit about what that means to you?
It's kind of how we start. Think about how we start meetings sometimes. I mean, we go into this mode where we're having a meeting. We think initially, I got to critique this, or I got to find out what's wrong with it. And I always start from the premise, what's right about it? It's very, very different. And the reason you do that is because now you have told the person that they have created some value that matters to you. But when you go on the other side and go, oh, you tell them what's wrong with them, they're constantly trying to create the value for themselves. And then they're not focused on creating value for others, which is what you want. But that has to happen all the way through the organization. And I think it's something that I really focus in on because it's easy to pick things apart. It's actually harder to start with, hey, what's right about it? Then I ask the second question sometimes, what can make this more right? And it's just it's totally, that little nuance kind of shifts people's focus to say, oh, wow, he really liked what I had to do. And now he's helping me make it better. It's those little tweaks and that stuff, as you talked about earlier, as a purveyor of culture, which I think I am, that's what I'm looking for. How can I make those little tweaks in the organization that really shapes the place to feel better for people?
Well, that last one it really hits home, because that's not something I don't think I do that one particularly well, but you're forcing me to really think about that. So thank you. And thank you for all of this. I sincerely appreciate having you on campus. Hope to have you down here much more frequently. And again, thank you for your time.
Hey, I enjoyed it, Anthony, and you and Pat and Sherry. I really had a good time, and I love it when I go places and leave with good friends, and I consider all of you that. So thank you very much.